Now this has been 6 months getting to this point because of that first comment about rust. They did a wonderful job in Indiana when I went down to see this vehicle to cover everything they possibly could. And they did that through putting patches on top. And we're talking thin aluminum pieces of metal that were pop riveted into place that covered the existing rot. And then they used undercoating. Now, so when you initially look at the vehicle, you go underneath it, of course you're lying on the grass, you're underneath a car. What are you trying to see? You're trying to see, terrible things. Well, if those terrible things are covered, it's very difficult for you to then try to figure out, is this car a good car to restore? Should I pass on it? Or is it the kind of car that I can then talk down the value? Can I say, listen, I'm not going to pay you $10,000 for this vehicle. I'm going to pay you only $8,000 for this vehicle. So these are things you got to be aware of and take a look at. But like I said, the next thing, as I said, is tools. In order to move forward on a car like this, you're going to need some tools. And I'm talking a toolbox, yeah, absolutely. You're going to need all sorts of ratchets and you're going to need all sorts of tools. But some of the things you've got to have, and a pneumatic chisel. I went to Princess Auto. The Canadians out there will know Princess Auto. I went to Princess Auto. I was able to get a pneumatic chisel for, like $25. I picked up a compressor. I picked up a blasting cabinet, and you just watch their site, make sure the things go on sale and pick that stuff up. And lots and lots and lots of locking vice grips. And if you think you have enough, you don't. But the key is you really need those as well as, when you start putting the panels on and trying to do some fitment and alignment. And as you can see, I put some of the panels on for today. These are not welded in. These panels have simply been pushed there so I can start to look at some of the gaps and to start to look at some of the fitment. And one of the challenges you're going to run into is these parts don't marry very well with original parts. So if we take a look at some of the original parts that I'm going to show you that I'm going to attach to the vehicle, these repopped panels hardly make it. And so it's a lot of massaging that you have to do. But let's start. Let's take a tour around the convertible and show you what I did. So let's get a little bit more close and personal here. When we take a look at the panel that I installed, this didn't work at all. You couldn't close the door there. The door hit at the bottom and there was a huge gap at the top. And if you, as I mentioned earlier, if you take a look at Joe Daddy's films, you'll see that what ended up happening is a lot of these panels just simply didn't fit the contours, didn't fit the lines. So two things I had to do. Number one is I had to make a cut down the panel. That cut down the panel allowed me then to push this ridge back to the original post. So that started matching with the post of the vehicle. This now gave me the opportunity to start getting this gap. Now this gap is just starting. I'm not anywhere near saying that this gap is right. You're looking for about a 3/8 inch gap. This is certainly not a 3/8 inch gap, but the idea is the panel is starting to actually fit. I'm getting alignment on the top and getting alignment on the bottom, and this was out. So just like Joe Daddy suggested, I had to make a relief cut on the top and the bottom and in the center, and that allows me to push this panel in and then screw it, and then that holds the panel in. And I've actually now got a surface that, although I'm going to need a little bit of filler in here because it has gotten a little round, I have a surface that now matches, and I have a door then that matches down the side of the car. So some of the keys that you're going to find with these panels is you can't blame yourself. One of the challenges I had was I would buy these things, bolt them on the car, and they wouldn't work. And I thought, what am I doing wrong? I don't know what to do. And that's where I turned to Joe Daddy's Garage and realized these things don't fit. And they won't fit. And you are going to have to cut them. You are going to have to weld them. You are going to have to do a lot of work to them to get them the way you want them. But, that's part of what you're doing here. This is part of the reason I'm here. You're trying to bring one of these things back from the brink of death, and get it to the point where it's actually a driver. So here's another example of the same panel. As I mentioned earlier, the panel quality is good, but the fitment is bad. The edges aren't as sharp and crisp as an original panel would be. In fact, when you take a look at this panel, I've already modified it. If we take a look at the extension and we place the extension on, we'll see that
the line of the body meets the original body panel, and you say to yourself, "Oh, hey, Wally, that's actually not a bad fit." Well, that's because what I ended up having to do is I had to drill out the welds that were here, and I had to push this down. This actually was up a good 1/4 of an inch on this side. This whole panel was up a 1/4 inch. This whole ridge was out, and drill out the spot welds, push this panel down, and when I pushed the panel down, I was able to get the panel to match on the outside like I wanted it to. So if we take the piece now, and we try to put it as best we can, and again try to align it so that we have a straight line down the center, you know, we're matched up in here pretty good. We're not bad here. There's a little bit of work that still has to be done here, some massaging. But my biggest challenge is that if I'm flush at the top and then I flush at the bottom like that, this is actually not flush here. This panel is lower than the original piece. Now, I can't modify the original piece. These were pot metal. You can't do anything with these things. If you touch them, you'll snap them. So what I've got to do is I got to take this panel and bring it out. Now I can either bring it out through trying to massage it out. You can even feel it. It's not round. You can massage it out, or what you can do is we're going to have to probably fill a little bit, you know, to flatten the body out. But a car like this, if you're going to want to truly flatten it, you are going to have to put in filler. It's the only way to get the car flat. You know, you're going to be putting in filler, you're going to be sanding off that filler, and you're going to be putting in filler again. So, like I said, the pieces are good. They do need work. Joe Daddy was the one who pointed this out to me, because when I put it together and it didn't fit, I thought to myself, what am I going to do? And of course, just watch his videos and watch them over and over and over again. And he went through all this. He's gone through this a dozen times before, all the pain and suffering on what these panels are and what they aren't. And you're going to know then what you're going to need to do yourself. And everything he's had to do, I've had to do. So it's not that his panels were unique. This is what you get when you go aftermarket. So, you know, like I said, we have to take it what we can. So we just simply stepped to the other side of the vehicle. And as you can see, and the reason I wanted to come back here is because the damage that you see in some of the pics here now was on the surface, and be very careful, because any rust you see up here is amplified underneath. The rust boils up, so anything you see on top, imagine it's worse underneath, and you be prepared for that. And if you are going to be restoring one of these vehicles and you do come across the rust like that, you're going to have to do what I ended up doing. So you peel this back, you expose the frame rails, and you can see the frame rails are all rusted out on the car. The only way you can go forward is to cut them out and replace them. And of course, you know, when you replace the frame rails, don't just cut them flush. What I did is I cut them as a Z. So there's a bit of a Z for the American audience. So you have a Z cut that allows you then more surface area to weld back in when you're putting the arms back in. The other thing I can't stress enough is when you do bring the car home, make sure it's level. The jack stands are level, and if that means shimming the vehicle, then shim the vehicle, because when I did cut out one of the arms, I could use the other arm then with a level, and that allowed me then to make sure the original arm was back up to the proper height. And of course, measure the heck out of it, measure it before you cut it, measure to the ground, measure to the other arm. And then that allowed me to then, once this arm was replaced, I could replace the second arm and then put the rail back in the back. And that really does allow you to then make sure that everything's still square. And then before you weld these panels in, or these pans in, put the gas tank in. Because the gas tank is the original gas tank. There are mounting screws that are in all of the flanges all the way around here. So by putting the tank in, putting all the screws in, that meant the panels then aligned with an original part. Then you weld these in, because now they have moved depending on where the gas tank is. So now you get the point where you get this all inside and you get it all cleaned up. Well, again, some of the challenges you run into, of course, is the inner and outer wheelhouses. I wasn't expecting to replace both inner and outer on both sides, but I ended up having to do it. Originally, my thought was I was just going to cut the outer wheelhouse out and put a new outer in. But by the time I got these frame rails cut all the way back in here, it didn't make much sense to salvage the inner. So it was another trip down to CJ Pony. Now the nice thing is these parts aren't that expensive. You know, I mean, you're talking some of the whole rear pan assembly was $180. Now that's US. being a Canadian, you know that now ends up being $250 or $230. And then on top of that, you would normally have to pay for shipping and duty and taxes. Well, I ended up, what I did is I combined a trip down into the US a few times, and I would drive down to CJ Pony, pick up the parts, bring them across the border, and of course if you stay more than 48 hours, you can bring back $800 worth of parts tax-free. So it ended up being the best way I found to save money bringing back these parts. But the whole rear assembly, $180. The wheel houses, inner and outer, was like $130. And again, I'm talking US money here, so Canadians, please adjust. But it made sense to replace these parts, because if you do open this up, it then exposes all the frames inside, and you can get in there and clean it all up, wire brush it out, put in the POR 16, clean the whole thing out. And it really makes it a lot better for the car itself for longevity. And as I said earlier, once pieces are open, you know, whatever your rust proofing that you like, if you want to use rust inverters, or if you like using the POR 15 or POR 16, or if you just like using rust paint, whatever you can do to get inside the frames, wire brush them, clean them out, and spray them inside as well, is just going to help with the longevity of the car. One of the things you have to watch out too as well, and again, this is being a convertible, I had to do the Convertible Crush here on the top fender. Now this is because the actuator arm for the roof comes down and it sits on top of this part here, so it can't be rounded, it has to be flat. Now Ford back in the 60s obviously had a beautiful little press. It would press this nice and flat. You get a nice oval landing area in here. Well, I had to beat on this with a hammer for about 10 minutes to flatten out, so it's not beautiful by no means, but the idea is at least it's flat on top now, so when the arm comes down it has a place to sit. But welding, you can see there's different kinds of welding you have to do. You're doing spot welding, you're doing heavy welding on the frames. Now my little 120 volt welder has been great. The only thing is when you don't have all of the adjustments you do with a more powerful welder, you have to switch the wires. You have to maybe switch between a 0.25 or a 0.3, something, you know, because as you weld something thicker, you need more voltage, but a thinner wire is not going to carry that voltage. So, you know, you got to adjust as well. But basically, as you can see, rear panels are all in, rear sets in, all welded in. So, you know, there was a lot of rust to take care of on this car, and you may get to the point where you're tired of cutting rust and welding rust. So keep yourself occupied. If you get to the point where it becomes a job and it's just, oh, I just got to get this done, you got to walk away, do something else. Hey, here, let me show you what else I've been doing on this car. So as I mentioned earlier, 289 C code convertible, great little car. Has a power roof. Now some of the cars didn't have power roofs, so this has a power roof, and I thought, you know what, this is great. You know, you're driving along, you want to put the top down, you want to put the top up, but the challenge has always been the same. You're driving, you pull over, you put the top down, which is great. I push a button and the top goes down, and then I got to get out of the car, run around, and crank down all four of the windows. So I thought to myself, why don't I do this? So great time to do this, because if you are planning on, you know, adding some value to the vehicle, adding power windows as I'm doing here, getting into the vehicle is a lot easier when the panels are gone. So my word of advice, think through what you want to do to the vehicle. Don't make any quick decisions as to what should happen and what shouldn't happen. If you're putting in power windows like this, what a great time to do it. Like I said, I have the full exposure here. The electric window system is a lot different than the original crank, so there's cutting to be done and everything, and it's a lot easier to do it when the panels are open. So just again, like I said, word of advice, think through what do you want to do to the car, what are the things you want to get done, and when the parts are open, you can then work on them. It's a lot easier. And then I can get this all rigged in, and then that way there it's ready to go when I do finally get the panel back on. Well, this is the final shot. This is straight down the vehicle. As you can see, the whole front end I've had to replace pretty well these 4 quarter panels. So the inner fender panels, 1, 2, 3, 4. They rust on the top here, and as you can see by the picture, they get rust coming up through again, up through. So if you see something on the surface, amplify it, multiply it, because it's worse underneath. So rusted on top, rusted in the boxes here, and a lot of that had to do with the battery side, so a lot of that had to do with acid. Obviously rotten in the front corners, as you can see, and I've had to cut and replace and put new patch panels in there. The biggest challenge I ran into is back in the rear quarter in here. What had happened is they had welded in a piece of metal. Again, very poor job. Every couple of inches they put a spot. When I took that panel off, when I cut that panel out, it ended up being just, they left the rust and just covered over it. You're going to run into it, and so be prepared. So what I ended up doing is cutting it out, respirator, eye protection, hearing protection, cut it out, and CJ Pony once again, so my third trip now because I had not expected this one. So get ready for a lot of trips. I was able to get a replacement piece, so you can buy anything on this car, right? So I bought a frame extension piece down here, cut out the old piece, trimmed the new piece so it fit flush, and then I welded the heck out of it. And like I said, my little 120, it does a good job. Just gotta make sure you get the wire right and make sure you get the voltage right. And it had great penetration, was able to get a great cut along here, and I was able to re-weld it to the floorboards because they had done, again, a poor job of that. In fact, the car had floors done on it probably about 5 years ago, so the floors were in okay shape. The only challenge was they did a poor job welding them in, so I cut those welds back out, and then I dropped the floor because it's another thing they did. When they put the floors in, they didn't put the floors down low enough, and they didn't make contact with the truss and all of the under frame parts. And being a unibody, being a single body, a non-frame body, what you end up with is that each piece is very important for the structural integrity of the car. And so this brings me back to my jack stands again. Make sure the car is level, because if you start cutting these pieces out, this car will move. You will shift it, it will twist, because you can't just cut pieces out. So make sure you brace it if you have to. But in my case, it wasn't that extensive, so I didn't have to do that. But if you're going to put a whole new floor pan in, make sure the car is braced, because it will twist, because that is part of the structural integrity of the car. So replace the inners and outers, and of course what I ended up doing is I had to cut out my VIN numbers, because the original panels had my VINs, the new panels don't, obviously, and you can either go ahead and try to punch them in, which you're never going to get looking right. So what I did is I just cut out the VINs, welded them in both sides, so now the VINs are back at least, and they're blended in, so now I've got my VIN numbers back. And if you take a look at the top here, I got some baggies full of parts, and this is just, I grabbed a couple, throw them up here, because as a reminder, when you do disassemble a car, go to the dollar store and buy as many Ziploc bags as you can of various sizes, because every single nut, every single bolt, every single piece you take off this car, you put it in a bag, and you write on the bag, power top from battery through firewall. That idea, so it not only is a reminder of what the part is, but where it went on the vehicle originally, because after 6 months, or in my case, probably another 6 months by the time I started assembling the electrical on this car, I'm not going to remember where that part came from. So make notes, put it on the documentation as well. So I now have a car that's rust-free. I'm at the assembly stage. I'm going to start putting the car together. So what am I putting together? Well, 289 C code convertible. I want to pay tribute to not only my original fastback, but I want to put on some of the aftermarket stuff that you were able to order from Ford. So I'm going to turn this car into a GT. So I've got the headlights, I've got all the GT badging, I've got the GT gas tank, gas filler. I'm going to, obviously I've got my center console. I was able to find one here in Canada on Kijiji, so I was able to get a center console, the original 68 consoles. As you know, 67s, they can remake those. The 68s, they were foam, they were vinyl covered foam, vinyl covered foam, and they're rare as hen's teeth. So I got a center console. Now, console I bought was first standard. Why is that? Because also on Kijiji, I found a world-class T5. I'm going to convert this car to a standard transmission. So again, I found a used T5, a world-class T5 actually, which is great. So I'm going to put a 5-speed in, because you want to do something, because even if I left this as an automatic, I would have upgraded the transmission, because the 2-speed or 3-speed transmissions back in the 60s, you know, the poor car is doing 3,000 or 4,000 RPM at highway speeds, so you need to knock that down. Other things I'm doing, as you know, is power windows. I'm also putting in air conditioning. Yeah, it's a convertible, I'm putting in air conditioning. I live in Canada, yeah, go figure. But the idea is so there's a lot of things I'm going to be doing to the car, and here's what I want it to look like when I'm done. My original 68 was a Acapulco blue car. I have the slotted rims for this car. I've got the GT hubcaps for this car. So like I said, and upgrading the braking system. This car was a drum brake all four corners, even though it was a 5-lug. I'm moving to obviously better 4-caliper pistons in the front, so we're gonna 4 piston calipers in the front, so we're gonna be able to stop this car. But that's my journey so far. Like I said, make sure you document everything, make sure your car is level before you start this whole thing, and hopefully we can start bringing some of these cars back from the brink, and I hope that's what I'm doing as well. So until the next time, hope to see you soon. Have a great day.